All right, and then we need to have right here window display. That's weird, but maybe not. Yeah, that's pretty weird. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And then I want that to be, it's like it's in a layer. No, that makes sense. All right, let's start this episode. I'm still figuring out how to do all of the streaming tech. But so last episode covered a wrap up of NGrok functionality and Servercache testing, or not testing, I guess. And just to recap, Google Drive is doing some funky stuff. To recap, that looked like pushing along an overall effort to build this style of service mesh. And I think sometimes when you're regarding your cost constraints and your budget and time constraints, and then the NGrok piece being worked on was in this diagram, right here, in this local proxy box. But when you're pushing along efforts that are as large as this with your cost and time constraints, you also have to, I think, respect those constraints. And in this case, it just meant, nudging it along a little bit and going to the full depths of standing up the API gateway service, which exists. All of that code, I kind of nav to it. I think it not only exists, but it's in microcloud, it's in gateway. It probably has tests written against it already. So it not only exists, it has tests, which is obviously a lot more favorable, than not having that. But it kind of indicates that in a lot of respects, I've had this tech laying around for more than 5 years, which is a crazy amount of time in some respects. But I think all of this work is reflecting years of effort, which maybe is a decent time to just re-explain the purpose of this podcast or live code stream. Is basically to demonstrate the nuances of what actually authoring code, especially at this scale or level of maturity, and especially when it comes to the more difficult issues, just providing, whether it's different personal wisdoms or insights about the process of coding, and opening up some transparency, especially when it regards what it looks like to bring a whole system online, or to code, more challenging things. And then today, we'll go through ClickUp here in a second, just some of the nitty gritty type of stuff sometimes, as well. Helps create insights for people that are interested in building, whether it's technical systems in the enterprise or, running a end-to-end startup tech ecosystem. So with last week being mostly focused on this diagram of creating the NGrok via local proxy, with that bigger effort in mind for the service mesh, I went through and I tested everything that resulted from that work. And so what I typically do, is I have a stack that I go through, and I typically run tests on after a significant push. In this case, it had been maybe a push of three or more weeks of just running and writing code without significantly testing. But what it kind of looks like if I start from the bottom. So I start with the file system as my bottom layer of the stack, and every code base will have this kind of this type of idea that you test the system incrementally from the bottom layers outward. So when these tests run, yeah, actions is where it's at. So all right, good. At least ran on main. So when these tests run, basically they are setting up this microhost tool, an action that then runs tests within all packages. I'm also generating coverage metrics. So basically, like what I do is I test it on my local system, and then I run it through GitHub, which tested on Ubuntu. I had previously had it so that, and what you can do in GitHub is you can basically specify, you can open up what that action file looks like. So you could specify right here a string of operating systems that you want to test on, as well as configuring like the version of Node that's going to be on the box. I have found though, so I previously had done it with different operating systems and it worked fine until I had this line, for instance, had always read runs on Ubuntu latest. And you would think that, there's no difference between, I guess, well, I had thought falsely that just having the OS here and having like Mac OS latest was sufficient, but it wasn't until I changed this runs on to also run on that operating system. I just started seeing a lot of weirdness within the GitHub test runners. So for instance, if I go to, I believe it's the server, we'll see an X, and that's because it will sometimes build on Mac and sometimes won't. It'll just hang typically. And my research tends to suggest, it just hung right here. It just stopped responding, I suppose. It's kind of interesting. That is interesting. Well, I'm just reading the console logs for this. That is separate from the point that I was making, but basically, like, it will just hang. Obviously, this build for Mac succeeded. So probably if we went to the bottom, I tend to look for, in this test runner, just coverage metrics, and right here, and whatever the last test suite that ran. Looks like I have 70% coverage, which is decent. So yeah, so what I've kind of done. So the other thing I've run into when it comes to GitHub Actions is you tend to have these limits on how many hours of test time you get per month. And so I learned the hard way, because these Mac OS tests would just hang. I must have had multiple test runners that were just running indefinitely, and so I'd quickly hit, let's go look it up, GitHub Action Test, what would we call it, limits, yeah. Hours. So I'd guess that this says you have, on the Pro plan, you have 40 hours of build time. So you basically, on some levels, so I was running the month that I hit all of my limits, I was running DevOps tests. So I was running like a full LAMP installation as part of the test, which, there are ways around having tests that do that. But if your goal really is to, like, demonstrate, if you're trying to install LAMP start to finish, I don't know, you could just, try to set it up one time and test it by hand on like a container. But, I think sometimes if you're trying to instead have your hardware or your software set up as part of like some user script that you run on like a developer's box, which is what it is in this case, it's kind of worth testing. But via that, I hit that 40-hour limit on testing, and so as a result, especially with tests like this that just hang, because you can run a calculation on it. Basically, I have a timeout set to 5 minutes, so after 5 minutes, it'll just fail, which that's indicated right here. And you can bump that time up if you need it, but usually most tests should be fine running in 5 minutes. But yeah, that said, I test most everything only on Ubuntu. I'm developing on a Mac, and so I just test it locally on the Mac, which, that should be sufficient. What else to say? So what I typically do is I test the entire stack. So I do the file system, I do the server, I do front end, the Vue.js wrapper, and so far that's kind of what my usual testing regimen has looked like, because that's the core meat and potatoes of this software ecosystem, because that's including your ability to author servers, do basic file system stuff, and then just run front ends. So typically when I finish, let's call it like a sprint, I like to go in and just check off, especially, so what I tend to do when I'm filing tickets is either go into, and so this is ClickUp, where anything that's purple up here has kind of been marked as done. Let's see. I don't want to mark that as done. So I tend to go back into ClickUp and I just mark stuff as to do, or sorry, I mark stuff as done if it got finished in the last sprint. Definitely, like, having to abide cost and time constraints. I do have a versioning mechanism in here where I just tag a ticket as v1.1. When it comes to generating a changelog, you would just look for all tickets that are v1. I think you could show that probably this way. And so then anything that's like in here would go into your changelog. I'm sure there has to be a tool out there that automates this, so that it's, you get like a nice little JSON or changelog that you generate out of it. But generally, like, what I like to do is get in here and then either, complete stuff that's been done. I log. Sometimes a ticket may not be created for work that was done, and then I will just instead, I'll write a new ticket and then mark it as done. That way you're kind of logging, even if it's stuff you didn't plan to do, you're putting it in there. And then, if I'm kind of leaving things unfinished, they need to be marked as well. So like in the file system, I'd probably put fix. Okay, so this would be and then DX stands for developer experience. CICD. Spelled security on there. I just leave that as is. All right, so here I'm just like logging what work actually got done. That way there's some kind of ticket, notating what the work does. And then both of these marked as review. Probably add both of these, again, that kind of version tagging. And I think because like more lately, it's been definitely an effort of, I don't think you should ever sacrifice quality, but what you can do is take shortcuts and prioritize so that you're not digging super deep into the weeds, so that you're not just digging super deep into the weeds needlessly, so that you're driving toward what you want out of any software product is usage. And I think sometimes there's ways to not, you don't sacrifice quality, but you're just pushing out a more minimum, keyword being minimum viable product. Major stopping block that the effort got to in terms of this most recent round of testing. So to recap what that looked like, so there's this server status cache, which, funnily enough, this is actually, it's probably incorrect. Well, I don't actually fully know why it's got into that state, but let's see. So the idea is that I'm going to bring online my own website, and then we'll see this cache get updated. But the idea with this cache here, which is the last unit of work, that way you have some flat file in your file system that always maintains what servers are online, what port they're on, what PID that they're using. And we'll see that update in a second when the server comes online. And so, yeah, kind of self-healed on the server that was no longer up. So that could have been that, and hopefully, I would hope that what happened there was that I was actually doing some testing on this particular server in this folder it brought it online, and then I probably did something like I closed my laptop lid before shutting down the server. And then my computer's been having issues lately with putting it to sleep. It'll just crash instead, which is obviously frustrating, but that would have meant that this would not have been written to prior to shutting down. Because in other words, if I brought this server down, we should see as part of the shutdown, it just takes out. So this is the Servercache. This is a precursor, as I explained in the last video. This is a precursor to, having having a gateway. So the complexity here, not present in a gateway, is that a gateway acts as a single process, whereas this cache file is kind of written to by all processes. So there's a bit of complication in terms of file locking, but this is a good redundancy for a gateway, just because, like for that edge case I mentioned of just closing my laptop lid, there's all kinds of edge cases where, server state, if it's in memory of a gateway process, might become lost to the gateway process. So having this as a fallback, is handy. So where was I going to go from there? I was going to say, going back to where I hit a snag was when it came to testing some of this. It just requires having a test suite of starting external servers. So it's just anytime you're dealing with multiple processes, as I know from server. And then, let's see. So yeah, having this type of thing marked as well, which is where I got to a stopping point on, just because I think it just was the type of problem, like when you are running as part of your test harness, starting new executables, you're just adding a lot of outside complexity into that test suite, and a lot of different things can happen. So it's harder to get a reliability out of it. So that's why I decided that was going to be the stopping point. And I was going to pivot. So let's put that like there. All right. No, I think I checked all this already. Already updated status. Ability to spawn server. Yeah, this is related to whatever. Yeah, so that whole set of caching stuff that I went over here is just not something that I've been looking forward to. And I think in terms of like those sets of goals with caches, and in fact, it's like could just make a pivot here and do something different on this live stream than WordPress. So the goal is having an endpoint where, here, let's try it. Goal is having an endpoint where, so we'll call this servers. We're going to make an endpoint where we can access that cache, basically. And then this will be a GET request. And so what we'll do now is, I believe server comes in, if I'm not mistaken, right there. You don't have to do it this way. There's some issues having the server class that way. host servers. Okay. That is sent. Could be that. Why is the path not working? Okay. So oddly, it's worth checking right here. It could be that it was trying to go to HTTP. Then when I did ping, so that could have been a browser thing. Servers. Let's add that back in. Okay, so it still gets us that success here. This is what we wanted to see. So that's probably correct. And then we'd say instance cache lead server cache. So now when we run it, we want to see that server cache, which is right here. So worth noting, you know, this is just relying on hot reloads of this file. So as per development. And then here it'd be something like for let read and cache, for let PID and cache CPD. And then good old GitHub autopilot. And then it'd be like if entry and entry status equals online. Just get like something like servers. We would call it this file system. Sometimes you write code and you think you remember the function names, and then you just have to bang the save button until it seems like it's tested and working. This needs to be a separate function of like get server name. And so I probably have this already somewhere, but it's probably like in here, or it's in, because where the heck does it get the name from? Ugh. So when you're trying to like orchestrate systems together, you know, one of the pains can obviously be you don't want to duplicate your own code. So it has some default for name. So this is how it's getting the name. This is, ugh. So okay, so I mean this is basically doing it in this way so far. So you just want consistency. You know, you don't want to duplicate code. You're just going to confuse yourself that way. So it does seem for sure like extra time cost to dig into stuff like that as you're writing code. But it's, you know, it's better to write, you know, code that's not going to just lead you to be confused later. What you want is exactly the experience that was just had, which was, you know, you want to be able to know where to look up previous efforts, and you want to be able to reliably figure out and have that moment where you're like, oh yeah, I already coded this. I could go into a whole separate topic of how, like, for instance, adding JSDoc, I know within this file, everything's alphabetized. So, you know, that can also, you know, create that effect of like, oh, good, I already like took care of this. Going back here, you know, it's almost like I would probably put something right here. And then, because this will at some point, you know, come back to package object.name. And like, there's other places, the place where it actually winds up being called, you know, doesn't supply a name. So do it right here. Yeah. And then here. Something like that. But for now, you know, it's a-okay to just code it this way, provided it did that correctly. That provides that, you know, I remember the names of things correctly. All right, so it takes the name, and then what we want is here. It's just HTTP. Really? No. Sometimes GitHub Autopilot manages to trick me. Like, it just had right there the autocomplete of the server name, and it manages to do a decent job of tricking me. And I'll just run the code. I think I had 2 uppercase was like the C in uppercase was lowercase, and then that was causing an error. So sometimes I'll trust it too much, and then it will give me an error. And it took me a little bit to figure that out, that I had simply accepted what GitHub Autopilot was offering up. All right, so now this could work. All right. Let's try that. Here, there. So let's see, there's an error. It's saying 2 slugs, not a function. So what this was, which is good. Okay, that's because it's a static function. Now it's saying name. It's not defined. IDS. Scroll down. Likely is an error. Make sure it's get package object. That sounds correct. And then it's saying name is not defined by line 20. Oh, that could be handy. Okay, cool. That worked. All right. So I'm inclined to just. So this is what I think it maybe ought to be. Yeah. All right. Go back now to, what was it? Get name. And then we will return instance, what is it? Yep. I believe this gets set. So this is part of the last change set. So it gets set. Cool. So this is accessing the directory that the server of this particular process was started in. Although this, because it had a different, it should have a fallback. Check this as a fallback. All right. So all right, the fallback name is going to be the package name, and then I believe it's here, server. Yep, this is the one I wanted. And secured on. All right, and then we return server name or fallback name. Okay, so then back in this servers thing, we now want this to be get name. And that, I'm kind of disbelieving that my code just worked that way, but because I guess I don't refresh package reads, but yeah, so then if I removed that, it would default to the package name. So again, like, I don't think I would be able to write code and have it just work. You know, most of me coding so far, you know, today has just been, you know, it's been mostly smooth. If anything, I think I'm more often than not surprised by how well things work. But on the other side of that, I can imagine, you know, for anybody watching this live stream, you know, it's apparent just how long things take me to do. And I've talked to other people that write code, and they love that, you know, in many respects we could say I over-engineer, but, or like if I listen to, Y Combinator has some great content on YouTube, and, you know, they tend to talk about startup founders who, you know, have worked at big tech companies, and they just over-engineer stuff, and you just don't need to solve for every problem, which, while I understand that side of things. I think that for everyone saying that, there's a lot of people that also, work work from a point of view where they don't really have that technology basis. But I think it's a game of, don't compromise quality, but also, you have to respect your constraints and really focus on that minimal version of minimal viable product. But I think another reason that I go to lengths like this, for instance, is because this is more just integrating code that had already been written. And I think the other reason to spend more time on this today, even though I had planned to get onto WordPress, is just because what we want is exactly something like what I'm about to do here. So let's see. So what we want now is so now what we're going to do thinking. So basically, this is now just coding up something that will, so if I can exhibit what this thing should do. Let's try Service Cloud, and we'll go to payments, and we'll just bring the payment server online. All right. Yeah, so that's bizarre. Let's figure something out here. All right, so this. So first, I want to check here. So that has brought Mike Witt server offline, which is just incorrect. And then that's definitely always figure out what the heck happened here. The idea is, let's see. So once this this endpoint is working, now you have a lookup of where to query on your local host for a particular named service. So you're not specifying the ports directly, which I explained in the last few episodes of this, that a cheaper way to do this would be to have every service in your tech ecosystem have a fixed port, and then you just call some kind of flat lookup file every time. The service would always be available on that port. And I've definitely done that before, but I think because I'm trying to build a multi-user system, invite other people into this, I think that's where you have to have something that's more dynamic. It's kind of why this evolved the way it did. Go ahead and start. So the console is dropping all of these issues just because the local LAMP copy is not online. But yeah, what the heck is this thing doing? Okay, did it just go online or something? It may have just gone online. And this looks correct, which is good. I just don't know why. It's just really odd. So this is not incorrectly reflected, which is another thing I can think to do is to update the endpoint. Try running it again, and so both times it's getting what looks like an incorrect server name, even though I would try see what this looks like. Okay, so that's correct. So then this has got to be something like let's get name function. So path is in the CWD. Okay, package key. Wow, that's so odd. Okay. Try that. Hopefully that's something. That seemed to do something, which is pretty odd. For some unknown reason to me, it just makes it seem like I must have some bug where the current working directory is just probably getting set somewhere in here, but I can't understand why. So adding this to perform a lookup in the CWD fixes it, and it just must have been, let's see, let's try. Nothing going on there. I have real doubts. Probably has nothing to do with this. No. It's really odd though. So could probably go back to here and then no, this actually makes sense. So what was happening was because this endpoint was being run from the MikeWit server, the current working directory was set to MikeWit. It was grabbing that name from this key. So that's what was happening. All right, so now that that is kind of squared away, right? So the objective is that not read property place. So now that we have kind of this lookup object right here of like this is what services where, now it becomes somewhat trivial here. So I think, yeah, this is just going to wrap Axios. And then let me think about this. So it's going to look something like this. Await Axios. All right. And then here, make sure it's included. So there's a lot of naming issues going on here, but that's, you know, tolerable. The goal is just to get something working now. All right, so now go to whatever the main page is. We should be able to access that should be defined. Actually, it's not going to be that. So seeing it's not finding microhost fetch. Okay, just rename it. There. I guess. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to access that endpoint, and then from that endpoint's results, it will then issue a subsequent request. But I don't yet know if or the extent to which. So maybe it's like we call this like service name, be fine. And it would be something like if server's service name yeah, pretty much this. All right, and so then it'll be something like this: slice one, and then ops, and then ops. I think hostname goes to that. All right, so we should be able to do something like Axios payments ping. It could just be host. I don't know. And then we would return these results. Beats me what the all right. Somewhere I'm sure I've done. In fact, I think I know where I've done this. So if I go I believe it is something like link. Shoot. Somewhere, I would guess. Glossary link has a Looks like I only did it half there. Get the link. So what I'm looking for here is whether or not the link is absolute or not. I don't know. It seems like the answer is to say if path so I'm trying to basically accommodate multiple different use cases of Axios or interfaces that they support, and yeah, I mean, it's basically anticipating if this link rewrite happens or not. But I suppose another way to be thinking about it is whether or not I think I just thought of a way to simplify this. Here. Boom. All right. And then we'll just make this a all right, so requesting a service is going to instead enforce only using one format of Axios. Right there. Boom. Makes life quite a bit simpler. All right. Boom. All right. So what this should allow us to do is cannot create property URL on string. Try that. So it seems like it's having an error. Because it's a service function, which it And now what did it give as a response? Yeah, there's the data. All right, so that is at least like that leaves this unit of work at a stopping point where there's some value gotten. So one of the values gotten out of this, I don't know if it's gonna. This will probably be SaaSworks payments local SaaSworks.io/. So one of the values is NGrok automatically now brings servers online to the internet through tunnels, which was covered the last 2 episodes, notably bringing up this local proxy portion of the diagram. And then the goal of having the cache to be in a more robust and tested space was that you now can make calls out to other services locally, which allows the development time to be simplified or shortcutted, or I think I mentioned a reference in the first 2 episodes to like when you're doing serious construction projects, you have to have some kind of scaffolding. You have to have a simplified way to bring your systems online. You have to be able to break it down into steps. And so effectively, what this API allows for is it's a real-time, call to another local service without having to know what port that service lives on, and so you're just addressing it by name, which is usually 90% of the time what you want, and that foregoes the requirement of having to have. So basically, once you go to the level of having like a service mesh gateway, so I have PM2 actually in this diagram, you kind of start getting into some like space of you at least want your gateway always online, otherwise you aren't able to access other servers, and you also want process management so that those servers are always like self-started or whatever. So adding that to your local infrastructure development is not always ideal, just because that can be kind of on the heavier side, I think. I mean, I believe in the last 6 or 9 months development, I have cut down the memory footprint considerably of each process, but it's still nice to have this kind of an interface. Just want to double check that. Yeah, good. Mic's still going. Yeah, this allows development to occur as though the live production server is online, even though right now my plan is not necessarily to push forward on relying on local microservices. This at least allows prototyping to be done with constraints, and then it's not hard to build some conditional logic in here. So this would be kind of what the interface looks like, and that could be everywhere in the code. And then later on, this could just seamlessly access a gateway if a gateway exists locally. And I have found that having fallbacks like this as you develop, not only are you increasing reliance and redundancy, especially in testing spaces that are harder to code. I mean, for instance, like I mentioned earlier in this episode that I hit my GitHub action hour limit by testing out LAMP installs. I have tests written for the PM2, but I think that you tend to see a lot more flakiness when relying on outside processes within your test runner. Why that's the case, it's probably at that point it's OS specific to how processes are managed on the OS. So you're sort of getting outside of your portability, ability to test with portability, which is I can see the value that anything like Kubernetes or Docker Swarm brings to developers, but I think that's why, you tend to have some people that frown on that kind of usage, just because it adds to your overhead, especially if it's required while you develop. You know, it's not to say that that thing alone will cause you pain, but if you make 10 or 20 decisions like that, and now you're having to do 10 or 20 things just to do one thing of progress, that's where life starts to become painful. And it's when you allow that mindset to occur of like adding more tools into your stack. So I'm probably going to wrap up today's episode, which kind of should cap off this leg of work. I mean, again, the type of stuff that I had done, whenever I wrap up a sprint of work, I will make sure that the whole thing is tested from top to bottom. Especially in this case, it's been 3 weeks, so I had done a lot of things external to this, so I had lost track. So it's important to test. Important to go into your task management tool and just update, add new tasks that are new to-dos, and then just mark whatever you've done, even if it's not in here. Keeping a log of what version a task belongs to, so that making change logs is pretty easy. And and then just capping off this kind of an effort, so that now there's this interface to query out to other local services. And I think that will wind up tying into this next leg of work, because I think probably when it comes to WordPress, I don't know if I have a good diagram for WordPress, but it's always worth checking. This is more of the application layer of WordPress. So what we want is more like the infrastructure layer. I doubt there's anything in here. WordPress integration, Stripe to WordPress. No, but I suspect that what will happen is that there's going to be probably, I will work on some kind of gateway mechanism, even if it's just self-contained in like a WordPress content service. And then rather than make calls directly, I don't know, we'll see. I don't yet know if the work from today on querying outside services will play into this next leg of WordPress work. But the next leg of WordPress work is to basically be grabbing website content. Let's see if I can trigger that more properly. Nope. But it should be grabbing website content out of the WordPress instance, which it kind of is on this page already. But I think that the bigger goal here is to set up a call to action, so that when you specify like a page, which I have already on this website, but you have like a call to action. So here there's like a Google form. The other call to actions that I think should be specified in the WordPress instance would be like a Stripe payment link, or hitting Calendly, which I've kind of started to hook up right here. But again, it's having that dynamicism where your content management system specifies the call to action of a particular piece of content, and then you're kind of defining those separately. So there'll be one post type will have all of the different Google forms, and I'll go over how that product will feature pre-filled forms, having like the Calendly link, and you can kind of do some of that pre-filled type of magic there as well, and then the payment link. And so once those things are all kind of playing together nicely, the system I think is going to look a lot more interesting. And so those will be covered. It'll probably take maybe 2 more coding sessions like this to start to make it look real. All right, I'm going to wrap it up today, and I assume that for now, my ability to form an interesting live code stream is quite boring, but I'm sure someday maybe people will look back and have questions, and if you comment, I'll probably get an alert, and I'll just respond with an answer. All right, cheers.